that ADB is taking on heat stress and the significance of the impacts on the lives and livelihood in our region. And I thought we would use implications of heat stress and how we need to differentiate the impact of climate change on women and men as part of our considerations on an adaptation as an example. So it is well understood, and recent research is sharing light on how heat stress is uniquely affecting women. Heat is already a major global public risk, and women are particularly vulnerable due to factors including their physiological differences. We also have the fact that heat creates a double burden for women who are not only more physically susceptible to its effects than men, but who are also more frequently, they shoulder the additional paid and unpaid care responsibilities associated with heat-related illnesses. Heat has a major impact on unpaid domestic labor, where the burden falls disproportionately on women, and particularly on lower income women who tend to spend time inside homes doing household chores. And often that is a one-room dwelling made of heat-trapping material. Heat's impact on paid labor falls on women. Also in the context particularly, and Yasmin will be talking about this in the agricultural context, where women play such a huge part of the labor force. And then in areas of paid employment in the conditions in factory, where we have often thousands of women working in unventilated conditions who are particularly vulnerable. So it's understanding and addressing the differentiated impact of climate change on women and men. This is essential if we are to effectively adapt. And I think let's look at a few examples of solutions. So at the house level, adaptation measures require a combination of the technical and the people-led solutions. Adaptation to extreme heat in the context of housing can involve solutions such as cooling roofs, greenery, and cool pavements. But it is so important to ensure that such solutions are identified and implemented in close collaboration with local communities, and especially women, to ensure that the solutions are locally and culturally appropriate and that they can be maintained by poor households. There's also the question of how we provide resting spaces, public spaces, which are appropriate for women. And I think in that context, even in the European heat waves of the summer of 2023, we start to look at the question of how do we provide public spaces to escape, in cool spaces, to escape from the extreme heat, even in the same way that we provide disaster shelters to escape from storms. So it's ensuring that these solutions are identified through people-centered approaches that also promote empowerment, such that urban poor households, especially the women, can increasingly participate and have a voice in decision-making. Likewise, and Yasmin will talk about this, we need to consider these same approaches as we figure out solutions for women involved in the agricultural space. So the key takeaway is that the gender-responsive approach to climate change adaptation is both a strategic imperative for building resilience and ensuring sustainability of adaptation measures. If we ignore the gender dynamic, it often leads to maladaptation because it misses out on addressing the needs of 50% of the population, and it misses out on the contributions that women can actually make. So what are we doing here at ADB? There's a lot of work going on to scale up our efforts in adaptation. There's a lot of work going on with national adaptation planning and how do we convert that into investment pipelines. And we are ensuring that those are appropriately worked and informed by and with women's groups. We've established the Community Resilience Partnership Program, which is intended to help countries and communities in Asia and the Pacific region scale up investments in climate adaptation. And this is especially investments at the community level that explicitly address the nexus among climate change, poverty, and gender. We are supported and grateful for the support from the government of the UK, French Development Assistance, and the Nordic Development Fund for us to be able to do that. But the program a little bit unusual for ADB. It has been developed in very close collaboration with the Huaru Commission, which will also be involved in supporting the implementation. And for those of you who don't know, Huaru Commission is a women-led social movement of grassroots women. So we have, in addition to the funding from those development partners, we've also been fortunate to secure investment finance from the Green Climate Fund, which will enable us to roll out local-led adaptation measures through downstream investment programs. And this will spread across a number of countries, including Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Pakistan, PNG, Timor-Leste, and Vanuatu. So the adaptation and resilience strategies need to be gender responsive, inclusive, and empower women to better cope with and overcome climate impacts. So I'm very pleased to be here for this session, and I'd now like to hand over to my colleague, Yasmin Siddiqui. Yasmin is part of the Agriculture, Forestry, Nature and Rural Development as part of ADB's sector group. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Noelle. Respected and eminent dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen who have traveled from afar to attend this forum today, and to my sisters, I thank you for this opportunity to address you today. As Noelle mentioned, my name is Yasmin Siddiqui, and I'm the director for a very long title for Agriculture, Food, Nature and Rural Development. I cover Central and West Asia and the countries of South Asia. So the region is large and contrasting, but the gender issues are quite common. It's my sincere honor to be in your company today and to share some perspectives which will set our scene on gender in agri-food systems and how we can collectively work to place women and gender at the forefront of climate change adaptation, particularly in agriculture and rural development. I'd like to start with the line that women are farmers, not just men who are farmers. Today, women assume important roles throughout agri-food value chains to ensure food security and nutrition at community and household levels. They account for 37% of the rural agricultural workforce. That's worldwide, and 48% in low-income countries. These are not small numbers. They are our agents of change. And in the work that I do, which is to lead projects and technical assistances across these countries, what is so important is the inclusion of gender upfront and central in all of the solutions that we provide for climate change adaptation and building resilience. The latest FAO report builds on its earlier work, which was in Women in Agriculture, Many of you may remember that, Closing the Gender Gap for Development 2010 to 2011. And I'm very pleased that we have our colleagues from FAO here today. The report documented the costs of gender inequality, not only for women, but also for agriculture and the broader economy and society. Most importantly, it highlighted that women, if they have the same access to productive resources as men, could increase yields on their farms by 20 to 30%. And this is a figure that has always stayed in my mind, particularly when we talk about food insecurity today. Simply by providing women equal access, we could make tremendous contributions towards global food security. So, a decade on, the latest FAO report on the status of women in agri-food systems highlights again that access to land, inputs, services, finance, and digital technology, which are key to agri-food systems, continues to lag behind that of men. I found that rather depressing reading. In many countries, there is still much to do to ensure that women own land in equal proportion to men, and that legal frameworks also reflect the rights of women. Although it's encouraging that there are gaps which have been closed in access to financial services, mobile internet, and mobile phones, there is still much to do, and we all take a collective responsibility in that. Access to irrigation and extension services is still lagging. So reinforcing, we must consider gender dimensions in all elements of the work that we do. And I must say, I'm reminding constantly that phrase, farmers are not just men, they are also women. Thank you. So, Noel outlined in the climate context that women have definitely disproportionate impacts from climate change and disasters. It highlights why we must therefore put women at the forefront. And in a way, what I would say from my perspective is have those very gender dedicated and inclusive approaches, really segregating to some extent the types of interventions we make for women, because they are indeed very contrasting to those that are mainstreamed for men. For me, a critical fact coming out of this latest report is that closing the gender gap in farm productivity and the wage gap in agri-food systems would increase global GDP by 1%, or nearly $1 trillion. This would reduce global food insecurity by about 2 percentage points, reducing the number of food insecure people by 45 million. So a simple, or maybe not so simple, feature of including women could actually reduce global food insecurity. And yet, in all the conversations that we have, does this fact come out as a prominent fact? I've rarely heard it. And again, I'm grateful to FAO for bringing that feature out in their report. I have now a few slides just to illustrate what we're discussing here today and to set the scene for you. If we could go to our first slide. This is a short video from the Bangladesh Second Crop Diversification Project. It was approved some time ago in 2010 for a small amount for ADB of $40 million, and it closed recently in 2018. But it definitely illustrates that by including women in gender-targeted approaches, the value addition that can be made to food security at a local level, but also at a country level. If we could play the slide, please. Thank you.
Near the town of Nator in western Bangladesh, Moina Begum and her fellow planters have come to the fields to pluck chili peppers. They, like some 75% of the population of Bangladesh, rely directly or indirectly on agriculture. Yet while women play a key role in tending and harvesting crops, they often have little influence over the planning or financing of family farms. Moina was forced to take over her family's farm work after her husband lost his hand in an accident 2 years ago. It was a tough time making ends meet.
আগে খেতে পাইনি হয়তো বা একটু ভালো মন্দ খাওয়ার ইচ্ছা হলে খেতে পাইনি ভালো পোশাক আশাক পরতে ইচ্ছা হলে পরতে পাইনি কো এগুলা পরতে পাইনি এখন একটু ভালো খাই বাজারে যে উচ্চমূল্যক ফসল ফলাই
The second crop diversification project, supported by the Asian Development Bank and the government of Bangladesh, aims to improve incomes in the agricultural sector and strengthen food security. Its success rests in part on the recognition that women must be included in discussions on which crops to plant and how best to market the produce. Moina Begum was among a group of 20 women farmers in Nator helped by the project. They were able to secure a loan and get advice on growing high-value crops such as chilies, tomatoes, and cauliflowers. Thanks to the training she's received, such as proper use of insecticides and fertilizer, she's seen yields steadily increase.
এগুলা বাজারে বিক্রয় করি ভালো মন্দ একটু মাছ শাক এগুলা কিনে আনি খাই
Thank you, Moina Begum, and many other sisters that we saw in this video who were targeted by this project specifically, which had a whole component looking at women's inclusion in high-value agriculture, in climate adaptation training, and also access to financial services where women could co-sign loan agreements. It wasn't just for the men to access those loans. And it had a target set of 50% female participation. The project achievements resulted in women's increased participation in the agriculture sector decision-making, which I think is crucial for women's empowerment as a fundamental, but also resulted in increased crop production. And also women were included in marketplace selection, another important part of that participatory process where women are included in decision-making and in the project design itself. Women were able to access agricultural credit, and in 2016, about 123,000 women accessed credit due to this project. These achievements resulted in practical and strategic gender benefits for marginalized and poor women farmers. So this illustrates that by having an integrated approach where women are included very specifically in a project design, we can achieve substantial results. Moving to the next slide, it's important to also consider the unequal access to land. And we talked about already the fact that in many cases, women still don't have land rights, which forms a fundamental impediment, often in the case of accessing credit, but also being a part of the water user organization or the collective entity related to irrigation practices. I'd like to here illustrate an example very briefly where, again, by focusing in on the role of women and giving them better access through legal frameworks, we can make a difference. In 2005, and this is going back some time, but I do consider this to be a progressive example, the Chhattisgarh Irrigation Development Project in India that was financed by ADB, again, a modest amount, $46 million. This really made a very targeted effort towards inclusion of women in a legal framework. The government was due to update the Participatory Irrigation Management Act for the state. With the help of ADB financing and technical assistance resources, which were dedicated gender resources, the state was able to create a new PIM Act, which was focused very much around women's participation. In fact, there were two very specific provisions in the Act. One was for the membership in the Water User Association to be on a household basis. So this was no longer about man or woman. This was about any representative from the household being a part of that Water User Association, and that women members were to be eligible to attend meetings and also cast votes, which had not been in the previous Act. Secondly, that all adult women who were part of a household that was a Water User Association member could stand for election and hold office in the Water User Association. Now, for many of you, this may seem today, is this really sort of progressive? But I consider for the time of this project, and even today, this sets a good example of what could be achieved in a legal framework context if we make that additional effort. And yes, it requires additional effort. And yes, it requires additional research into where are those key constraints and impediments in the landscape of a situation when we consider irrigation and rural development. The project achieved good results, and out of the 1,320 water user associations that were established, about 34% of the members were women. So it did demonstrate that you could get those better inclusive approaches in a project. I'll just try to move ahead to the next slide. So thirdly, coming now to climate resilient agriculture. I really believe that just as we saw with the Green Revolution in the 1960s, where everybody believed that the world had reached its peak of population and that no longer could we support the world's food demands, came the Green Revolution with high-yielding varieties of crops. In the same way, and in my optimism, I believe that technology will be the answer and will be the driver of change. Technology transcends across genders, so long as those who are developing it, designing it, and providing access consider gender as part of their solutions. What we do know today is that there are many technologies in place which provide agriculture innovations such as precision farming, genetic engineering, biotechnology. Many of you may be familiar with vertical farming and indoor agriculture, also drones and satellite imagery. Overall, modern technology has transformed agriculture, but what is important is to have that gender inclusive approach. And again, we have examples from, I'm going back to South Asia here, in India, where we have in Maharashtra state, Kisan Connect, which has been a leading farm initiative of online provider of fresh farm produce, where women can use mobile phones to sell their products. No longer are they reliant on men, no longer are they reliant on transport routes or themselves in a way to be out there in the marketplace, but they can do it all through an online platform on their mobile phone. There are already today 40 such groups of active women farmers who are registered with Kisan Connect and supplying regularly for onward selling of nutritious food throughout the digital medium. More women members are coming forward, and these are the type of areas that we can work with through private sector to really expand the outreach and the inclusion of women in digital solutions. We know that the gender gap exists there still, although the FAO report is encouraging that in low and middle income countries, the gender gap in access to mobile internet fell from 25% to 16% between 2017 and 2021. And also access to mobile bank accounts narrowed from 9% to 6%. Much work is to be done in closing that gender gap and digital divide, particularly in countries which are less served by internet access, and there are plenty of those. Private sector plays a catalytic role to ensure, and we can see the examples from India and Bangladesh that provide us that optimism and that forward thinking that we can make changes. So I'll turn to my final slide with some takeaways. Thinking ahead and doing more. Looking back on the achievements, we have examples of progressive initiatives and projects, so we can build on those. I see a cyclical effect. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, when many of us were perhaps studying, and those of you who are younger were probably still at school, but there was a very famous piece of work by Robert Chambers of putting the last first. That helped us understand participation and participatory processes. And we need to go back to some of those principles about participation. We must not leave women out of the entire process. For me, it's very important to influence my team members, who are the project officers at the front line, and constantly remind them to think about women. Building on what is there, we can go further. Engaging upstream on climate and technology provides us an opportunity to think collaboratively. My equation, women plus inclusive technologies, leads to transformative changes, leads to food security and increased resilience. I encourage all of you to be bold, because it requires being bold. do more and use your voice. It's time for gender inclusive solutions. We have the world of technology at our fingertips, and we need to make use of that. So my mantra for today, and which will continue, is that it is not just men who are farmers. It is women who are nearly 50% of our farmers. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Yasmin, for setting the scene for this panel discussion, where we shall be exploring women's roles in promoting climate-resilient agriculture. So specifically for this discussion, we shall look into how women are able to participate across the agri-food value chains. And for this, we shall be hearing about an ADB-led project that has enhanced women's engagement in horticulture value chain. We will also look into how vulnerable small-scale farmers, especially indigenous women farmers, were successfully engaged in decision-making and policy formulation. Finally, we will be exploring private sector's roles in bridging gaps and implementing sustainable solutions. So I have the pleasure now of introducing the members of the panel for this session. First, we will have Clara Mi Young Park. She is the Senior Gender Officer and Gender Team Leader in the Inclusive Rural Transformation and Gender Equality Division of the FAO headquarters. Clara has worked on gender equality and human rights with civil society organizations and with the UN across several regions. She has authored numerous technical publications, articles in peer-reviewed academic journals, and has co-authored a chapter on feminist contributions to climate change research, policy, and ethics. So friends, this is Clara. I'm happy to introduce Clara. Our second panel discussant is Waratida Chayapa, who is an assistant professor and assistant director and head of the degree program at Chiang Mai University School of Public Policy. Waratida's primary research areas are on energy and climate change. She has also been involved in the drafting of regional energy policies in Thailand. Finally, Waratida was also involved on the study on climate impacts in the coffee industry, which she shall be sharing with us in a while. And finally, we have, our third panelist will be Ranjita Puskor, who leads the research program on gender and livelihoods at the International Rice Research Institute. She also leads the evidence module of the CGIAR Gender, which stands for Generating Evidence and New Directions for Equitable Results platform. Her work focuses on generating knowledge, learning, and evidence that can translate into technical and institutional innovation and more equitable outcomes for women and other vulnerable social groups who are engaged in agriculture. Finally, we have our fourth panelist online. I hope he's online. Okay, there he is. So our fourth panelist is Avaz Nomanov, who is the project, or who was, because the project has already closed, who was the project coordinator of the ADB financed horticulture value chain development in Uzbekistan. This was implemented by the International Strategic Center for Agri-Food Development of the Ministry of Agriculture. So Avaz currently works for the World Bank Finance Climate Adaptation and Mitigation Program in the Aral Sea Basin. So friends, these are our panelists for today, And I'll be happy to shoot the first question. Okay, we'll start with Avas, who is online, specifically because he might, we don't want to lose him. So. Okay, Avas, I hope you're hearing me well. First question will be about the horticulture value chain development. In the light of the growing impacts of climate change on agriculture, particularly in the horticulture sector, how did this particular project in Uzbekistan effectively empower women and enhance their resilience in the face of climate-related challenges?
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you for inviting me to this forum. I'm very happy to be part of this very important forum organized by ADB. And it's always great to see such a focus on gender issues on international level. As you can see, I was a project coordinator at the Horticulture Value Chain Development Project. This project was a successful project and it was implemented in Uzbekistan between 2017 and 2022. The project was an FI project, financial intermediary project, but it had a very strong gender component as well. And it was an effective gender mainstreaming, and it had a special gender action plan, which was created before the project. Our project had 9 activities and 17 targets, which we successfully carried out. And the aim of the gender action plan, was to support the project in reducing women's poverty and promoting women's empowerment. So we'll stop in one of the main actions, and I will give some actual work that was done in the framework of this project. So one of the important actions was that we had to ensure that sub-projects which were financed by the commercial banks which participated in these projects, they had to utilize the female workers. So at the beginning of the project, our target was 20%. So the new jobs which were created had to be at least 20% for women, but we managed to make that number at 38%. So by the end of the project, out of more than 8,000 created jobs, more than 3,000 jobs were for women. So important work was done in this direction. Another important action was to set up women farmers associations in project regions. In order to do this, we worked closely with the Women's Committee of Uzbekistan. It's a very important body in Uzbekistan in terms of promoting women's rights. And it helped us a lot to achieve our goals because we had an access to additional resources, and it also facilitated our work in this direction. Another action, which was also very important, is to create women's groups. This was very unique approach. We created apprenticeship groups. So basically, there was an experienced businesswoman or a female farmer, and we paired them with unexperienced or new women farmers or businesswomen, and as they worked together, so the new farmers and businesswomen, they had a chance to learn from real life experience of these more experienced women, not just from textbooks or from seminars, but from real life experience. And it was very successful. We had more than 10 very successful examples where new farmers learned from their more experienced peers. Okay, and the next one, we paid attention to the dissemination of success stories in print media and in social media. And it was also a very successful step, I think, because I can give you one example. There were a group of 4 or 5 women who were really experienced in managing greenhouses. So we learned about this from one of our beneficiaries, and we talked to this woman, and it turned out that this woman, they used to be all just regular employees, but they learned the trade, the profession, and they become really good at it. And they became kind of crisis managers. They used to go from one greenhouse to other, and they used to revive the failing greenhouses uh, uh, with the help of their own experience. And we disseminated their success story. And so other beneficiaries also learned from this, and they contact us, they contact those women directly, and they invited them to their greenhouses to solve some issues, some problems that they were facing. So it was also, I think, important step. And also, of course, we had from the beginning of the project until the end of the project, we had regular gender awareness seminars and trainings for main stakeholders and beneficiaries. We had seminars and trainings for women, for participating financial institutions, and all other stakeholders which were involved. Another thing which I think was a useful thing that we did was that we required participating commercial banks to to uh, to to appoint a special person, a focal person for gender issues and environmental issues in each participating commercial bank. Before our project, they didn't have such people, but we required such action, and right now each participating commercial bank, we had 8 of them, they have such person who is responsible for gender requirements, who is responsible for environmental requirements. And right now, even after the project is finished, even if we are even if the project is finished, these banks they can operate with the help of these specialists. And for example, if they want to attract more loans from the international financial institutions, now they don't have to, they don't need our help. They have a special people who are working in order to follow the requirements in gender aspect, in environmental aspect, so they can work directly with the international financial institutions. And the last thing that I want to point out is throughout the project, we tried to help the female farmers and owners of farms to connect with the state organizations and local and international agricultural experts. I believe it's also very important because women, as you know, may not be very skillful in dealing with bureaucracy, or they might not have as good networking as men do in like governmental organizations or among the agricultural experts. So we helped them in this direction, and a lot of women used this this option. It helps them in their business activities.
Thank you, Avaz, for that very comprehensive discussion of this of women's benefits from the horticultural value development project. It, perhaps I'll just follow up with another question. Just in maybe in 1 or 2 points, can you share with us the lessons you've learned in your experience implementing this particular project, which can improve the outcomes for women farmers in similar projects in the future? Maybe 1 or 2 points.
Thank you. That's a very good question. We thought about this at the end of the project when we were recording some lessons for ourselves from this project. And as the speakers before me mentioned, and they pointed out, female farmers and businesswomen, they face different problems because of gender inequalities. And female farmers are exposed to climate impacts due to differences in gender norms. Therefore, gender-responsive, climate-resilient agriculture should include various measures to address these challenges. I will give some of them, which I think are suitable. First of all, we should make sure that allocation of project funds, specific funds for women. We should ask them before allocating these funds. We should ask the groups, the women groups, to determine how should these funds be invested and what should they be invested on. So this is very important in the project design stage. And also, when we are doing the trainings for women, we should do the survey before, just to know what kind of trainings they would like, what kind of capacity building they would like, and so that we actually give them what they want, what kind of trainings they want. And also, we should take into account the location of the trainings and the time, because as was mentioned before, women have different chores, household chores. Should take that into account. And if it's possible, we should do some daycare services for them during the trainings. That will be also very helpful. And another measure is, it was also talked before, but I also want to point it out, there should be an effective female representation in decision-making bodies. For example, maybe we should, when the decision is being made, maybe we should do in a way that the decision making must be endorsed by at least 2/3 of the female representatives. Such as, for example, if there are 10 representatives, 6 men, 4 women, men can always outvote a woman. So we should make that at least of those, if the decision is approved by 3 out of 4 of these women, it should be made. Even though, for example, 6 men approved it, but if the 3 out of 4 women didn't approve it, it shouldn't be approved. Or we should do some mechanism like this. I think it will be helpful. And the last one is the government policy of course can have a significant impact on female empowerment. So we should, for example, we should do some kind of KPI to incentivize local officials in becoming more attentive to women farmers' welfare. In this way, if we add this to the KPI, I think the local officials, they will pay more attention to the women farmers' needs and their welfare.
Okay, thank you so much, Avas, for sharing us the lessons learned, and which I think will be very important as we design future similar projects. So I'd like to turn on to the role of women in agri-food systems. So I'd like to ask Clara, our FAO representative, during in the studies that Yasmin also cited on the status of women in agri-food systems, it was emphasized that the role of women is very significant despite all the challenges. So could you share the key research findings, and specifically what were the key challenges, as well as how this can be mitigated?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. And actually, Yasmina made my life very easy because she cited already many of the important data. I would like to actually start by referring to another report which is coming up, which really shows us that the agri-food sector holds a great potential for reverting climate injustices if we bring climate finance to the countries and to the people who are contributing less to the challenges that we are facing today. So the report measures that estimates that income losses due to climate stressors can amount to up to $39 US billion per year for rural people, vulnerable rural people. And despite these challenges, the tracked climate finance today shows that only 7.5% of that goes to adaptation, and of that percent, only 3% goes to agriculture, forestry, and other land uses sectors. So already there, I think something to reflect on. And this, again, connects very well with the findings of the report on the status of women in agri-food system, which gives us new evidence, not only on the gender gaps that are still there, but also on how and the extent to which agri-food systems are conditioned by structural inequalities driven by gender and other intersecting forms of social and economic inequalities. So Yasmin already mentioned the global statistics. Agri-food systems remain a major employer of women and men across the world. So globally, 38% of women are engaged in agri-food system. In Asia, we have a third of agri-food system workers that are women. And in some countries in Southeast Asia, that percentage goes all the way up to 50%. However, their engagement in the sector still is not a par with men's. So they're marginalized in vulnerable forms of employment, in the low-skilled jobs. And we have estimated that that of those who are working for wages, and sorry, I'm relying here not just of my memories for the data, that only 54% of women that are in off-farm employment in Asia are working for wages, as opposed to 70% of men. And 89% of women are instead in vulnerable forms of employment, which means no social security, no safety nets. And the COVID pandemic has showed us that women are the first one to lose their jobs. So in the first years of the pandemic, we measured that 29% of women in Asia Pacific lost their jobs in the sector in only the first year of the pandemic. And not only that, but as Yasmina mentioned, there are still important gaps in terms of access to resources, important productive resources, services, access to finance and markets. So, and that is, for example, one key indicator that we use is access to land. And globally, in 40 out of 46 countries that are reporting under SDG 581, men have greater ownership of land than women, and that is 7 out of 9 countries in the Asia Pacific region. Legal protection has improved, which is measured again under SDG 582, but still the implementation is lacking. And one maybe last point before my time is up. The report also showed us that we really need to move forward beyond looking at gender gaps, but looking at what are the root causes of those of that marginalization and discrimination. And the root causes are still gender discriminatory social norms that keep women from holding positions, from fulfilling their potential, for also having their full human rights realized.
Thank you, Clara. Yeah, okay. Now I'll turn, picking up on the issue of vulnerable farmers, women farmers. I'll turn to Waratida to ask about the challenges faced by small-scale women farmers, especially indigenous farmers, and what would be the mitigating options or effective solutions to help them build their resilience.
Thank you, Alice. So good afternoon, everyone. May I have the slide, please? Okay, so it's very good timing. We almost reached the coffee break time. And so I would like to introduce you to the complex story about coffee industry and climate change. So first of all, I do not drink coffee, but I enter this industry because of I see the danger. Okay. For me, I'm the public policy scholar, and I work on climate change issue, especially mitigation, adaptation, many years. But recently, I organized the workshop, regional workshop, with my colleagues from Manila Observatory about loss and damage. So I found that it's very clear to us that we understand the impact of climate change in the form of extreme weathers, like a drought, flooding, typhoon, right? It's very clear, or storm, very clear to us that we see and realize the impact. But there is another kind of climate change impacts that is very discrete, and it's already happened very near us in the everyday life activity that we do, such as in the cup of coffee that we drink every day. Can you imagine how many cups of coffee are consumed per day globally? Can someone raise the number? Globally per day, how many cups of the coffee that people drink? 6? 2 billion. Okay, that's the winner. Okay, yeah, 2 billion. I have some souvenir for you from the coffee community in Thailand, so we will give to you later. Very good. So 2.25 billion cups of coffee are consumed per day globally. Can you imagine that's the number of people who are not aware that we have climate impacts in our cup of coffee? That's a very huge number. So that's why I entered this in the kind of area of the research in order to raise awareness of people. So let me show you the complexity that I found from my research that also relates to the indigenous ethnic group people who are the farmer of coffee in Southeast Asia. Can I have my slides somewhere in the farm? Still processing. Okay. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I will come back to this slide later. So in my research about climate change adaptation policy and in the coffee industry in Southeast Asia, I have opportunity to meet with many ethnic groups, ethnic farmers in Thailand, for example. On the picture on the left side, those are ethnic community who are the farmers of coffee. Okay, so what I want to emphasize here is, first of all, please be noted that there are pre-existing gender inequality in the coffee industry already happen before we have the issue of climate change. Climate change is the threat multiplier that worsen this pre-existing gender inequality in the coffee industry. Okay, so let me give some example of the pre-existing gender inequality in the coffee industry. Ethnic women have less access to higher education. Okay, coffee farms are usually inherited by the sons, and women, the daughter, will get married and move to stay with the family of her husband, and sometimes cut off herself from her own family after she was married to the husband. Another one, men process the income from selling coffee beans and then decide how to use those money. Women does not have the designing authority, decision making to how to use that income from selling the coffee beans. That is the common practice in the indigenous community who plant the coffee, but this is the gender inequality, okay? Then what I found is the gender response to climate impacts in the coffee industry. Women are very creative. We need to be innovative and creative, right? If we live among gender bias. So the first technique that I found that women, ethnic women have done is first diversify income. Only selling coffee bean is not enough, right? Because the men occupy that income. So women has to diversify their income by selling other kinds of vegetable, lettuce, something like that. And also the women can process the income that they sell with the lower grade of coffee bean. We have like high grade, lower grade, right? So women can take the income from that. And the last one, create new products. We have the coffee blossom, and it's usually fall because of heavy rain. So women create the new product out of this coffee blossom to make the tea and then sell it as a new product and earn money.
Thank you. Thank you for Tidel for that very interesting discussion on coffee, women's roles in coffee industry. I now turn to Ranjita. In your study, I mean, in ERI as well as in CGIAR, you have experienced you have found out that women experience adverse climate change impacts, and one of the methods that you have done to look into this is hotspot mapping. So can you tell us a little bit more about this, and what were the results that you found out from hotspot mapping?
Thanks, Alice, and thanks, ADB, for having me here. So we've heard about how women are disproportionately vulnerable to climate change since morning. We've heard about inequalities. Women are vulnerable, more vulnerable than men, but all women are not the same. Some women are more vulnerable than others. So how do we target our investments better to get the most bang for our scarce resources? So how do we make sure we are investing so that these women who are most vulnerable do not become more vulnerable, or it doesn't become worse? So we wanted to do, we did a hotspots mapping. We looked at hotspots where climate hazards and their vulnerability and their exposure to climate hazards actually intersected. So we looked at so we call them climate change, gender inequality, agriculture hotspots. So we looked at climate hazards, not just the shocks like droughts and floods, but also stresses that accumulate and are becoming really damaging to agriculture and food systems. So we looked at drought, floods, the climate variability, and how the growing seasons are reducing, the increase in temperatures that is affecting the crops and so on. So we looked at the proportion of population that is exposed to these hazards. We also specifically looked at women's exposure, their participation in the agricultural sector in these places, but also we've heard about their vulnerability because of the existing gender inequalities that, both the speakers earlier mentioned, how these structural barriers actually, make them influence their adaptive capacity and make them more vulnerable. And when we talk about these discriminatory social norms, we looked at the social institutions and gender index, the kind of the social norms, the power dynamics, the stereotypes, the masculinities that restrict transformative attitudes and behaviors, and the legal frameworks that are discriminatory. So we saw how all these come together and make women vulnerable to climate change. And this is the kind of picture that we came up with globally. So the brown and the orange ones are the hotspots, and the other ones are cooler. And zooming in on to Asia, this is what the picture looks like. I mean, I must admit, we didn't have comparable data sets for the island nations of the Pacific, but I think if we do have that data, they're going to go off the charts. They would probably be the hottest globally, given their exposure, the hazards, but also the inequalities that exist. So yeah, data is a huge problem. So this is what it looks at, this is what it looks like, the picture in Asia. And then also, okay, in a country, if a country is vulnerable, doesn't mean everybody in all the regions of the country are equally vulnerable. So we looked at subnational hotspots where these three come together, but we also looked at different crops and commodities where women are sort of engaged, the sectors. So the top right that you see is rice, and this is livestock, there's vegetables, and the bluish ones are perennial tree crops. This is for Bangladesh. We did that for Bangladesh and Pakistan in Asia, and for a couple of countries as a pilot in Africa. But Rwanda and Kenyan governments have actually taken that up and started doing the subnational hotspot mapping. So this is something that helps us target our scarce resources and then see how we are still trying to sort of, see how we can refine the methodology, but this is pretty good as it stands right now. And what we have done also is picked a couple of those hotspots and then went in depth and did a situational analysis, look at how climate change is influencing the food systems, what transformations are happening, and how that is influencing gender equality and vice versa. So and what kind of solutions are working in those places. So I think some interesting stuff is coming out of there, but I'll stop with that and then happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you, Ranjita. That's very interesting. We might have we will be discussing these hotspots, but from a different perspective in the next session, and that's really a very great study. So now I turn back to Clara. Okay, from your research, how are you able to inform policy interventions, and how are these translated into actions to bridge the gender gap? Could you provide a good example of such a way that's been supported by FAO?
Thank you. Yes, so I'll go back quickly to some of the policy highlights of the report, and then use one specific example of a project to see how those are being implemented. So the first important highlight is gender transformative approaches. So really putting intentionality on changing the discriminatory social norm, on fostering positive masculinity, and challenging some of the stereotypes that continue to hold women back. These approaches have proven cost-effective and very effective especially at community and household level, but we need to bring those to scale. And in order to reach scale, we really need a whole of society approach where the government, the private sector, civil society are all contributing to challenges these gender norms and promoting a more favorable environment for women's empowerment through national policies, campaigns, awareness raising, and large-scale integrated programs. The second highlight that Yasmina also referred to is still the importance of closing gender gaps in access and control over land. Land is such a fundamental resource that has multiple beneficial effects on resilience, on investments, on access to services, and in some cases, even reduction of gender-based violence. So we really need to bring back the importance of land reform, agrarian reform, of the agenda of government, and make that as gender responsive and inclusive as possible. Social policies that promote access to childcare for women are also very important. I didn't mention this when I discussed the findings, but one very important highlight was that the burden of care, of unpaid care and domestic work, and to what extent this is really hampering women's engagement in wage employment, but also access to all sorts of opportunities. So social policies are really needed in this space. Group-based approaches remain very important because by working together, we heard of some examples this morning. By bringing women together, we not only helped bring their collective action forward, bring the leadership forward, but group-based approaches are also very effective in encouraging the uptake of technology, access to services, and increasing the adaptive capacity of women. Social protection also has important benefits in terms of providing that safety nets that is needed for women, especially in situations of stress, and we've seen that very clearly with the COVID pandemic. One example that I wanted to mention very briefly is this GCF-funded project that FAO is implementing in Nepal, in the Churia region. And it's working in a very fragile ecosystem where there are 26 rivers that are coming together, making the landscape very susceptible to the impacts of climate change, with increasing variability of heavy rainfalls, floods, and all that. But also with heat, making the soil very either very fragile or also very hard to work. And this is really impacting on women's engagement, because they are the ones who are tasked with working the soil. So the project conducted I should also mention that the communities where the project is working and promoting practices for climate resilience, agroforestry interventions, are 50% of the targeted population by the project is women, 31% are indigenous women, and 13% are Dalit women. So we conducted an extra gender analysis to really assess who were the women that we were engaging with. And one of the findings, we don't have the time to go over all of them, but one of the key findings was that discriminatory and customary social norms were preventing women from having access to land. So even though the legal framework is conducive to women's equal rights to land, men are the holders of land. They control the land because this is also related to their social status. So the project is using gender transformative approaches to work with women, with men leaders, to holders of traditional authority, but also with households to promote better engagement of women in decision making at households and community levels. And that is already bringing very, very positive results in terms of their engagement in climate action.
Thank you, Clara. On the issue of engaging women in decision-making as well as in policy action, I'd like to ask Goratida, how can we effectively engage vulnerable women in the agriculture sector, specifically as you have experience in the coffee industry, in promoting women's participation in the coffee industry?
Okay. Okay, thank you, Alice. So, so from my work, I'm from the School of Public Policy. So our mission is to make public policy inclusive, innovative, and democratic. Public policy should not be the work of elite group or technocrats or experts or bureaucrats people or politicians, but it has to be the work done by public people. I mean, the lay people, everyone. That's why in our school, we promote bottom-up policy design, and we include people to run, to brainstorm, to exchange ideas in order to create sound and sustainable public policy together. So from my work on the coffee industry and climate change. Okay, so in September, we organized the regional workshop, Southeast Asia regional workshop, and we invited participants who work on coffee supply chain from all 11 countries in Southeast Asia, including Timor-Leste. But we lacked only 2 countries, Brunei and Singapore participants. The rest 9 of countries participated in our workshop. So in our workshop, we empower everyone to be policy designer. Have you heard about policy designer? Right? So we use the technique called foresight technique, future studies, to run the deliberative activity and allow the stakeholder to express their feedback and then come up with the solution together. In this way, we can make sure that our policy, public policy, become inclusive, and innovative, and also the last one, democratic. In our workshop, we don't have the indigenous group coming to join because it's quite difficult for them to travel, but we have the NGO group who represent the indigenous farmers from each country in Southeast Asia to join us. So that's how we try to empower ethnic people. But again, it's the duty of our public policy scholar to create the tools in order to get that feedback. For example, we don't use much words. We see many workshops create post-it paper, right? But it will be difficult for rural community to use written language. So instead, we come up with the techniques such as using drawing and painting, using a lot of metaphor, arts, something like that. So that everyone from different education, background, career, ethnicity, nationality can express what they want. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Varatida. For Ranjita, you've mentioned a bit about the role of the private sector, especially its role in driving innovation and implementing sustainable solutions. So my question is, could you share with us some key research gaps that you have encountered, and how can the private sector actually help bridge these gaps?
Thank you. So I think private sector has a very important role in scaling out innovations, for climate adaptation and mitigation, I think, especially where government capacity is constrained. I mean, through provision of finance, inputs, technical assistance, agroclimatic information, etc. But we recently conducted a review of what's happening on how gender responsive private sector engagement in climate smart agriculture is. And what we saw was that oftentimes it is actually a very short-term commitment tied to their corporate social responsibility goals. So sorry to say, but a lot of ticking the box rather than a long-term business strategy. I mean, there is a strong business case. Somebody mentioned that in the morning as well. Investing in women for climate smart adaptation, you know, you're expanding your consumer base. Women can be part of these supply chains. They can stabilize supply chains, reduce post-harvest losses. There's a whole bunch of benefits out there. There is a business case out there, but not a lot seem to be aware of that or making efforts to, you know, make it a part of their business strategy. You know, they could talk about how do we provide finance that doesn't require collateral, because we talked about how women don't have ownership of land and can raise that. Technologies which are gender responsive, I think private sector could actually well invest in that. You know, how do you make inputs accessible, small packs of seeds, etc. Simple things, you know, that can make a difference. So these are all, I mean, and when we looked at, I mean, you know, we saw a great example of lightweight solar panels in India, a company called Claro doing it. Interestingly, when we did that review, what we saw was that we looked at published literature, but also gray literature. More than 50% of that actually comes from Africa. I don't know why we don't have examples from Asia. And I think the private sector here is a lot more robust, I think. Are we not documenting it, publishing it? I'm looking forward to the session tomorrow, learn about those examples. I mean, there are solutions. I think we've got to identify those and see how we can learn. A lot of great examples from Africa. I don't think we have time to go into that. But I think it's about identifying those good practices and then seeing how we sort of replicate those in other cases. And one last point I want to make is when we talk about private sector, we always look at the formal big corporate sector. We ignore the informal private sector, those small seed dealers, input dealers who provide fertilizers, etc., in the villages, who women actually approach rather than the big corporate houses who don't necessarily go reach out to those women. We know hardly anything about those and how we can use them as agents to turn our women into agents of change, driving climate change adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, okay. Thank you so much for those sharings. I just want to quickly focus on women as agents of change. Sometimes when we get women to participate in projects and in community-based solutions, the question sometimes is, aren't we adding to their already burdens? I mean, Clara talked about care, their household responsibilities, but how do we make sure that getting them to participate in climate change solutions do not add to their burden? Anybody can respond to that. Okay, Clara, thank you.
Okay, it's a very important question. I mean, when we go to design projects and program, it's very important to do the proper diagnosis, no? So to understand really who are the people that we're dealing with, what are their needs and constraints. So doing a gender and intersectional analysis would be the first step, of course. Also, I think increasingly in FAO, we're trying to promote a diagnosis of social norms because, as we pointed out, it's often those unwritten rules, you know, those discriminatory social norms that have been perpetuated that make it difficult for women to even participate sometimes in community meetings, or even know about things that are happening. So I think these are the very basic steps that would be needed, but also what Ranjita referred to, you know, developing technologies with having women in mind and centering the technologies and the solutions around women's needs would be a very important step in the direction of making sure that, you know, we don't add to women's burden.
Anyone else who would like to respond to that? Very shortly. Okay. So yeah, we have another question and slide though. This is directed towards Yasmin. Some projects on women's empowerment and counter resistance from their family members. Again, this has to do with gender norms. How can we resolve these issues? Do you have any good examples at hand?
I was going to thank the person who asked me the hardest question. So, difficult one. And yes, I believe many of us would have worked in projects and environments. Even recently, ADB has been supporting in countries where there are very, very specific gender restrictive situations. But I would say that what panelists have shared, and a couple of you mentioned, I think, the bottom-up approaches, and I believe this is really an area that we need to re-emphasize. I'm speaking from ADB's perspective. We must really re-emphasize bottom-up participatory approaches, because a lot of the answers lie within the communities, building the trust with communities, and also the information sharing that takes place through focus group discussions and repeated opportunities to engage men, not just women, to share with men of communities what is it that we are engaging women over, because a lot of the time it's about busting the myths of what may be preconceived ideas of what women are being engaged for.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, one very quick response. The time is really...
I know we've been shown the red card a few times. So, but just to supplement, I think Yasmin said what needed to be said, but just going back to what Clara was talking about, the gender transformative approaches is what we are increasingly trying to use as we, when we go into climate adaptation or be it technology introduction, etc. And that is about influencing social norms, etc. And there's this whole suite of methods there, approaches that we are trying to use. I mean, engaging men and boys, addressing those toxic masculinities is one of those. Engaging households, household approaches is one area of work. Behavioral and social and behavioral change communication is another one. So there's a whole bunch of stuff as well. So that's being tested, and yeah. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Ranjita. We've run out of time and I need to close this session because we've eaten up some of the coffee break time. So thank you very much for this very engaging discussion. And we invite everybody for coffee. Okay, may we request everybody to be back in 15 minutes.